Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. My father's cabin sat empty for 11 months after he died. He built it himself back in the early 80s, up in the West Virginia Appalachian foothills where the pavement just ends without warning. One second you're on cracked asphalt, the next you're on red dirt and gravel that makes your tires slip. The road climbs in tight switchbacks, trees pressing in so close their branches scrape your windows. I told people I was too busy to deal with it. Work, life, the long drive. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to be alone up there. Not after the way he died, sitting in his chair with a book still open in his lap. Not after the stories he used to tell about hearing things at night and choosing not to investigate. "You hear something strange after dark up here," he'd say. "You don't go looking. You close the curtains and wait for morning." Eventually, property taxes forced my hand. When the cabin appeared around a curve, it looked smaller than I remembered, lower, like it had been slowly sinking into the mountain and finally gave up. The weathered gray wood was warped with age, the tin roof sagged in the middle, the balcony wrapped around the front, and beyond the railing was nothing but a steep drop into trees and jagged rock. I turned off the engine and sat there, hands on the wheel, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The forest was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No birds, no insects, just wind moving through branches too high to reach me. The front door stuck before giving way with a reluctant creak. Inside, the air was colder than outside, heavy. It smelled like old wood and dust, and something faintly metallic, like rainwater trapped too long in a closed space. Everything was exactly where my father had left it. His boots by the door, toes pointed outward, his flannel jacket on the chair, his chipped mug on the counter with a ring of dried coffee at the bottom, firewood stacked beside the fireplace with the precision that came from decades of practice. It looked like he'd just stepped out for a moment. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. I walked through slowly, my hand touching things without deciding to. The edge of the table, the arm of his reading chair, the doorframe where he'd carved lines marking my height as a kid. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing looked wrong. Instead, it felt like walking through a museum exhibit. Everything too perfect. Like the cabin had been waiting for someone to come back and see it this way. That first night, I crashed on the couch with a lamp on. The wind picked up after dark, and the cabin made soft pops and groans as old wood adjusted to the cold. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Above me. Not the quick scrabble of a squirrel, not raccoon claws. These were slow, deliberate, each step placed carefully, crossing from one end of the roof to the other with measured pace. I sat up and listened, counted the seconds between each step, waited for scratching, waited for something I could identify and explain away. The footsteps stopped directly over the center of the cabin and stayed there. I could feel the weight of whatever it was. The roof creaked slightly, the way it does when you walk across it. Eventually, my rational mind pushed back. This was the mountains. Animals did strange things. Deer could climb steep slopes. Raccoons walked along roof edges. I lay back down but didn't sleep much. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear that weight shifting above me. The second night, the footsteps came back around 10. This time they stayed above the bedroom, moving back and forth, like pacing. I grabbed the heavy mag light by the door and stepped outside. The cold hit immediately, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I swept the beam along the roofline, the trees, the slope below. The light caught mist drifting through the forest, turning everything pale and unreal. There was nothing there, no movement, No eyes reflecting back, just the mountain, dark and silent and vast. I stayed outside for 10 minutes, my breath forming clouds, waiting for something to give itself away. Nothing did. Eventually, the cold drove me back inside, and I locked the door with more force than necessary. The third night, I couldn't sleep at all. I made coffee and started going through my father's journals, composition notebooks filled with his cramped handwriting. Most of it was mundane: repairs, weather notes, reminders to check the chimney, clear the gutters. But scattered throughout were stranger entries. Heard it again last night, stayed inside. Kept the lights off after 9, seemed to help. Don't respond to sounds after dark up here, no matter what they sound like. That last one made my skin prickle. It was underlined twice with no explanation. The next entry was about needing more firewood. Around midnight, I needed air. My head felt fuzzy from lack of sleep and too much coffee. I stepped out on the balcony with a cigarette, and the air was sharp and cold, each breath like swallowing razor blades. The moon hung low and yellow, barely strong enough to push past the trees. Shadows pooled thick between the trunks. I lit the cigarette and leaned against the railing. That's when I noticed something across the gap, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. A shape in one of the trees. At first, I thought it was just branches overlapping weird, but it didn't move when the wind picked up. It didn't sway. It stayed exactly where it was. I stared, and slowly the shape became clearer. It was a person. A man-sized figure perched on a thick branch about 15 feet up, knees bent, one arm raised to grip the branch above. The position looked deeply uncomfortable, the kind of crouch that would make your legs scream after 30 seconds. But whoever it was showed no signs of discomfort, just that same frozen posture, held with stillness that isn't natural. He wasn't looking at the woods or the sky. He was looking directly at me. I couldn't see his face, just a dark oval where features should be, but his head was tilted slightly to one side, the way you tilt your head when you're studying something interesting, trying to figure something out. My mind raced through possibilities. A trespasser, a lost hunter, someone having a crisis. None of them fit. Nobody sits in a tree at midnight in January. Nobody holds that position for that long. Nobody stares like that without blinking, without moving, without doing anything human. I cleared my throat, made a small noise just to prove I existed. The figure didn't react, didn't move, didn't look away. The forest felt tense, coiled, like everything was waiting to see what would happen next. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. Time felt strange and elastic. Finally, I stepped backward into the cabin and locked the door. My hands shook enough that it took 2 tries. I didn't check the windows, I didn't look to see if he was still there. I just walked to the center of the room and sat on the floor with my back against the wall until the sky turned gray. In the morning, when I finally looked, the tree was empty. No broken branches, no marks in the bark below, no disturbed snow on the ground below, and there had been a light dusting overnight. No signs anyone had been there at all. I told myself I'd imagined it. Sleep deprivation does strange things, shadows and moonlight and an overactive imagination. But that night, the footsteps came back again. Not on the roof this time, on the balcony. Slow, careful, the sound of boots on wood planks, each step placed deliberate precision, walking from one end to the other. Then, stopping, right outside the door. I sat on the couch and stared at that door for what felt like hours. The handle never turned, nothing scratched at the wood, no knock, no voice, just the presence of something standing there on the other side of a door that suddenly seemed too thin. When the sky started getting light, I threw everything into my duffel bag and left. I didn't clean up, I didn't lock the door properly. I just got in my truck and drove down that mountain faster than was safe, my tires skidding on gravel around the switchbacks. I haven't been back since. The cabin is still there as far as I know, still slowly sinking into that mountain. Sometimes I think about selling it. Sometimes I think about hiring someone to tear it down. But I can't stop thinking about my father's journals, about those warnings he left behind, about staying inside no matter what you hear. I was in my early 30s when this happened, back in the late 90s. I had a steady job, strong legs, and a habit of disappearing into the mountains whenever I could afford the gas. The man I was staying with wasn't family. He was someone I'd met through work years earlier, a quiet older guy who fixed engines and avoided conversation unless it served a purpose. Over time, we started hunting together. He lived alone, far back in the Appalachian range, where the ridgelines fold over each other. He wasn't unfriendly, just precise, the kind of man who didn't waste words. Getting to his place took most of a day. The paved road ended outside a dying coal town, and from there we followed gravel that twisted uphill for miles. We crossed 2 creeks and climbed until the air got cooler and thick with the smell of wet soil and decaying leaves. When we parked, there was no clearing, just a break in the trees. We walked the rest of the way down a narrow path that sloped along the mountain, the forest floor uneven with roots and slick stones. The woods were quiet in a way that felt deliberate, not peaceful, alert. His cabin appeared slowly between the trees. It stood on tall wooden stilts driven into the slope, lifting it a good 10 feet above the ground. The wood was dark with age and rain, and the whole thing leaned slightly with the mountain. What struck me first was the balcony. It ran along the front, jutting out over open air with nothing beneath it but steep slope and shadows. There were no stairs, no ladder, no rope, nothing. Just that platform with a low rail and empty space beneath it. The only way up was from inside the cabin. I asked him about it as we climbed up through the hatch in the floor. "Didn't want company," he said, like that explained everything. And maybe it did. Inside, the cabin was a single room, maybe 300 square feet, rough plank walls, a small iron stove near the back, a table with 2 chairs, both scarred with knife marks, shelves lined with jars of screws, dried herbs, and ammunition boxes. The windows were narrow and set high. No electricity, no running water. A kerosene lantern hung from a nail, its glass clouded with soot. Everything smelled like wood smoke and gun oil, and something faintly sweet, like old sap. That first evening passed easily. We cleaned our rifles, ate venison stew, talked in short bursts about nothing important. Outside, the forest settled into night. The wind moved through the trees in slow waves, and something kept tapping against the stilts below. At some point, while we sat at the table, he said it. "Don't wander at night, especially not alone." I smiled, half expecting a joke. "Bears?" I asked. He shook his head once. "There are things here that don't like being surprised." The way he said it, flat, matter of fact, made me laugh, but he didn't join in. He stood, walked to a crate in the corner and pulled out some things, an apple, a heel of bread, strips of dried meat. He placed them in a chipped ceramic bowl, then walked to the balcony door. Cold air rolled in when he opened it, carrying the smell of wet bark and distant water. He set the bowl at the very edge of the balcony, right against the railing. "That'll be gone by morning," he said. I asked him what he meant. What could reach a balcony 10 feet off the ground with no way up? He didn't answer. He shut the door, latched it carefully. I noticed he used both latches and lay down on his bedroll without another word. I stayed awake longer than I should have, lying on my cot near the balcony window, listening to the stove tick as it cooled. The forest made sounds I couldn't place, low knocks between the trees, distant rustling, and once a heavy step followed by another, spaced too evenly to be a deer. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted off with my hunting knife within reach. Sometime deep in the night, something woke me. Not a loud noise, just movement. A soft scrape, like rough skin against wood. My eyes opened and I lay perfectly still, heart suddenly working harder. The lantern was out, but moonlight spilled through the windows, faint and gray. I turned my head slowly toward the balcony window. The bowl was still there on the railing, but empty now. As I watched, something rose slowly into view. Not a face, not a body, just a hand. It appeared at the edge of the balcony rail, fingers curling over the wood slowly, deliberately. The hand was large, much larger than mine, with 4 thick fingers that ended in blunt tips. The skin looked dark in the moonlight, rough textured. The fingers moved independently, testing the surface, pressing down slightly like someone checking the strength of ice before trusting their weight to it. There was no sound, no breathing, just that hand holding on. I couldn't move. My entire body had locked in place. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. The hand stayed there for what felt like minutes. Then, slowly, it began to slide back down. The fingers uncurled from the rail one at a time. The proportions were wrong, the spacing odd. Then it was gone. The forest swallowed it whole. I lay there in the dark, heart hammering, staring at that empty balcony rail. I could hear my friend breathing across the room. I didn't wake him. I didn't speak. I just stared at the ceiling until the sky lightened and birds started arguing in the trees. When dawn came, I looked at the balcony. The bowl was gone. Not knocked over, not broken below, just gone. We packed up without much discussion. My friend moved efficiently, like he'd done this 1,000 times. We hiked back to the truck in silence, our boots crunching through leaves. On the drive out, when we'd finally hit the gravel road and the cabin was miles behind us, he spoke. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. I didn't answer, didn't nod. He didn't push. We drove the rest of the way in silence. I've hunted my whole life. I've slept in the woods more nights than I can count, in places so remote you couldn't find them on a map. I've heard animals scream in the dark, watched shadows move where nothing should have been standing. I never went back to that mountain. And I still don't like balconies without a way up. That summer, my boyfriend and I were both burnt out in different ways. He'd just finished a long stretch of contract work that kept him glued to a desk, and I was coming off the end of a rough semester where everything felt loud, rushed, and unfinished. We didn't want a vacation with plans or reservations. We just wanted distance, somewhere quiet, somewhere we didn't know anyone. So we decided to drive. He had an old pickup truck with a camper shell over the bed, scratched windows, a stiff latch, nothing comfortable about it. But it worked. We threw a thin mattress in the back, packed a cooler, a couple of backpacks, and told ourselves we'd stop wherever felt right. No hotels, no schedules, just roads and places we hadn't seen yet. The plan was simple: keep driving until the world felt slower. For a few days it did. Long stretches of road winding through mountain towns, small diners with cracked vinyl booths, gas stations that looked like they'd been there longer than the pavement. We slept in trailhead pull-offs, roadside clearings, and once behind a closed visitor center where the lights buzzed all night. That day, we'd spent hours hiking near a set of deep green pools tucked into the mountains. The water was so clear you could see straight down to smooth stones at the bottom, and cold enough to make your legs ache within seconds. We stayed longer than we meant to, sitting on sun-warmed rocks, letting the sound of moving water drown everything else out. By the time we left, the light had started to tilt toward evening. We found a small public campground not far from the trail, the kind that doesn't show up unless you're already close. The road leading to it narrowed into packed dirt, then gravel, then something that felt more like habit than design. Trees crowded in on both sides, their branches brushing the truck as we passed. When we pulled in, there wasn't much to see. A loop of campsites carved into the woods, a few picnic tables, old fire rings filled with ash and leaves. One older man staying near the entrance, the campground host, we assumed, sitting in a folding chair like he'd been there his whole life. And one other campsite farther down that looked unused. That was it. No noise, no kids, no generators. Just the sound of insects and the soft creak of trees shifting. We parked beneath a thick stand of trees where the shade never fully lifted. The ground was uneven, packed down by years of tires and rain. Before climbing into the truck bed, I did what I always did. I checked the doors, pulled on the handles, made sure the locks were set, checked the camper latch from the inside, and pushed it again just to be sure. I've always been careful like that. My boyfriend liked to tease me about it, said I worried too much, but he never argued. The night settled in slowly. The air cooled, but not enough to be comfortable. Bugs chirred without rhythm. Something small moved through the leaves nearby and then stopped, like it had noticed us. The camper shell trapped the heat and the smell of sunscreen and dust from the road. We talked quietly for a bit, about nothing important, and then the conversation faded. At some point, sleep took over. I don't know how long I'd been out when I woke up, but it wasn't because of a sound. It was that feeling you get when something changes without telling you. The air inside the camper felt different, cooler, moving slightly. I sat up, careful not to hit my head on the ceiling, and that's when I noticed the gap of darkness where there shouldn't have been one. The passenger side door of the truck was open, wide open. The interior light wasn't on, so it was just a black shape against darker trees, but the outline was clear. The oar angled outward, perfectly still, like it had been left that way deliberately. My mind started reaching for reasons before fear had a chance to catch up. Maybe my boyfriend had gotten out and forgotten to close it. Maybe I'd messed up the lock earlier. Maybe the latch hadn't caught. I whispered his name. He stirred, confused, then turned to look. I could feel the shift in his body when he saw it too. "That's strange," he said quietly. Neither of us moved right away. We just listened. The campground was completely still now. No insects, no wind, no distant water. The kind of quiet that feels intentional. He leaned forward and pulled the door shut. The sound carried farther than it should have. He locked it, then checked the camper latch again, pushing until it clicked hard into place. "Probably nothing," he said, lying back down. But I didn't relax. I stayed awake, staring at the shadowed outline of the truck's interior, replaying the steps we'd taken before bed. I knew I'd checked those locks. I always did. The thought that someone could have stood there, close enough to open that door without us hearing anything, kept looping through my head. Morning came eventually. Sunlight filtered through the trees and everything looked harmless again. No disturbed dirt, no marks, no sign that anything had been there. The campground host waved like nothing was out of place. The other campsite was still empty. We packed up earlier than planned and drove on. My boyfriend still brings it up sometimes, laughs it off, says old trucks do odd things, says I let my nerves get the better of me. Maybe he's right, but I've never been able to explain how that door opened.